What if there was a magical girl fighting game? Recently I made a Precure Fighting Game and a lot of comments brought up DLC. This gave me the idea to make another video evolving this into a magical girl crossover fighter. If you want to see the Precure roster, check out that video and let me know who you would add. Once again, the plot is pretty simple. The fairies invite the Precure to a festival to see the Rainbow Palace. This palace connects all the Precure worlds and is powered by the Rainbow Keystone. The villains show up and break it, causing all the worlds to unite. That's how we explain the crossover aspect. Why are they fighting? Brainwashing and mass confusion. This is a celebration of the genre, so if somebody doesn't make it in, let me know in the comments. Spoiler warning for most of the franchises featured. With that said, let's get into what we're all here for. There's no way this video would not include Sailor Moon. She's one of the most iconic magical girls and played a large role in introducing people to the genre. Now we can't have everyone here, so this game would have set assists allowing every character to appear. These would be tied to directional keys, kinda like the items in the Storm games. 4 assists per match and 4 possible options. Sailor Moon would be our first new character, and based on what I've seen, she's a bit of a crybaby pacifist, but still rather brave. Now Sailor Moon actually has an arcade fighter, but we won't be pulling from that. In this game, she'd function as a zoner. Sailor Moon keeps the foe at bay by throwing her tiara. Her assists would summon the inners to use Mercury Aqua Mist, Flame Sniper, Sparkling Wide Pressure, and Venus Love Me Chain. These are all long-range attacks to emphasize that Sailor Moon doesn't really seem to hit people, at least not directly. They'd all slow down the opponent by freezing, burning, paralyzing, or binding the opponent. This would give her more time to attack or get away. For her own finishers, the first would be Moon's Spiral Attack. I love how twirly this one is, and the thought of a giant spinning heart just feels really epic and fun to me. Her second attack would make use of her super form, allowing her to perform Rainbow Moon Heartache. As for her third and final attack, she would obviously be an eternal form. The moon would appear in the background as feathers fly across the screen for Silver Moon Crystal Power Kiss. The direction could be changed, allowing for more control and range. So that's Sailor Moon, but what about... Much like Pichu is to Pikachu, I'd want Chibi Moon to be a sort of clone fighter that you might unlock during the DLC. She'd be a lot faster, but naturally much weaker than her mom. Her assist could substitute the inner Senshi for the animates, and her special attacks would be Pink Sugar Heart Attack, Rainbow Moon Heartache, and finally, Twinkle Yell. I don't know what this does, but perhaps it could summon Helios to ram his horn into the opponent, or maybe she could just ride him across the screen. To be clear, I only watched Crystal, so I don't really know what Chibiusa does, but if you're a Sailor Moon fan, you could let me know what exactly her powers are, because it was not very clear. When it comes to world-ending shenanigans, there's no one better to call than Sailor Saturn. I learned a lot about her from Science Project, but I think even in Crystal, I could appreciate how mysterious she was. We'll be using that version as a basis. Now, Saturn would be one of the final bosses or the last characters you unlock, primarily because of her power. She'd be working toward the apocalypse in the hope that everyone would be reborn in their respective universe. Saturn would be a strong cyborg who fights with her silenced glaive. She'd be another long-range attacker who swings her glaive and shoots energy beams like she did in Crystal. For her assists, Saturn would summon the outer Senshi. Neptune and Uranus would use their talismans to do big damage. However, Pluto would be able to stop time for the opponent, allowing Saturn to attack unobstructed. Saturn's first finisher would be Death Ribbon Revolution. This would summon a huge cyclone in the middle of the field, doing massive damage. Because of the time-stopping powers, I feel she should only get one more attack. Silence Glaive Surprise. The attack would create a rapid exploding ball of energy. I'm not sure how big it would be, but the game devs would balance it out. These battle options should make Saturn a top-tier player, worthy of being one of the last characters you get. The next franchise is one that's pretty dear to my heart, but is often held back due to its kinda dumb name. Now, if Sailor Moon's a pacifist, Ahiru is... I don't think we see her do much but dancing. I think she would be an evasive character that's really annoying to play, but also annoying to face. She'd have the wind fan to blow opponents away, and her attacks would be unintentional, like tripping at the opponent. For her assists, I think Fakir should rush across the screen with a sword, and maybe her friends could throw school supplies like Norimaru. The last I can think of is Edo, whose musical organ would play a tune, lulling the opponent to sleep. For Ahiru's first finisher, she'd take a heart shard from the opponent, draining their HP and refilling her own. For her second, Drosselmeyer would appear, trapping one of the characters in his gears, which would then rotate away to a bad ending. Finally, for her last attack, Tutu would transform into the giant swan girl from the story, and white swans would surround her, striking their opponent as they dance. I think this is a pretty simple move pool for a very simple character. Let's move on to the other girl I want to join the roster. In contrast to Tutu, Kraehe would be a fast and oppressive rushdown character. She'd use a lot of feather attacks with projectiles, claw swipes, and kicks. Kraehe would have a Muto summon where he'd valiantly rush across the field. Kraehe's finishers would be designed to mirror Tutu's. Her first would taint the opponent's heart shard, reducing their health periodically, kinda like a status effect. The second would summon her father, the Raven, to shoot a blast of feathers across the screen. Finally, just like Tutu, her final attack would let her transform into a giant black raven with smaller ravens attacking the foe. The two would be clones, but I still feel they deserve different slots on the character list, just so that this franchise can take up a certain number of characters. That said, let's move on to a quick honorable mention, primarily to address the last video. Splash Star is a season everyone overlooks, including me in my last video. I would have Bloom and Egret take up Stop and Freeze's slots, since we already have Twilight and Scarlet. Kaoru and Michiru were some of the most requested characters, and I have to agree. However, I don't know much about them, and based on the wiki, they were only cures for a short time. As a result, I would have them as alternate costumes for Saki and Mai, Twin Stream Splash, Spiral Star Splash, and finally, all four of them would perform the third one together, Spiral Heart Splash Star. Now, I feel pretty bad for Splash Star fans because their franchise is always being ignored, but I thought I would rectify that in this video before we move on to other franchises. The next franchise is one that's torn the community apart, especially in recent years. We're going to be adding I've always been fascinated by Madoka Magica's combat. Something about the use of traditional weapons in a magical girl show was really appealing to me. Additionally, they have a pretty interesting power system that I think we can play with to make some unique entries. First up, we've got Madoka. She's got a bow, which is her main form of combat. This would add some variety, as so far, only Saturn uses a weapon. Beyond this, her assist would be the Holy Quintet, all using their weapons. The only difference we'd make here is Homura, because she'd be in her glasses form. Now, about the finishers. I'd like to implement a kind of meter for the Madoka girls, and instead of having 3 bars, they would have 2 bars of super and a soul gem next to it. Madoka's first finisher would be the scrap attack from the radio drama, Finitora Fresia. There's no description, so we could just make it a pink arrow of energy. Pretty generic and standard. Her second finisher is where it gets interesting. If the soul gem is full, she would ascend to godhood and fire an arrow in the sky, just like in the anime. This is the standard second finisher. However, if her soul gem was empty, or if she had run out of meter, she would fall into despair and transform into her doppel form. This is a great way to incorporate Magia record mechanics and give Madoka some special treatment. I'm not sure how you'd fill the soul gem, I hadn't thought that far, but I think it's a cool gimmick to give her 3 finishers but have you choose between the latter 2. The next character we're going to add is Homura. This is why she was wearing glasses in Madoka's assist. The version we get to play as is the current Homura, who we meet in the anime's first timeline. She'd fight with a gun that fires bullets, which might feel jarring, but don't forget that Chibiusa pulled a gun out on her own mother. For her assists, I'd like her to summon her familiars from the Rebellion movies. For Homura's finishers, I'd like the first to be a flurry of bullets frozen in time, before rapidly hitting the opponent. This is obviously inspired by the fight in the movie Rebellion, which I think is one of the greatest scenes we've had in a while. The second finisher would involve Homura rewinding time to restore a portion of her own health. I know I'm giving a lot of healing abilities away, but I'm sure it could be balanced somehow, okay? Finally, her third finisher would awaken her devil form, consuming her soul gem. This would allow her to recreate the world, erasing the foe from the timeline. It would be a pretty epic finish, and I'm glad I got to place her in the game. If you're a fan of Madoka, you could give me ideas for this, because this is very much what I was able to come up with, but I'm always happy to hear other people. Realistically, I would love to have the whole cast here, but there's only one more character I think we need from Madoka. Bebe is a fun, playful addition who would fight in her mascot form. She'd have a pretty small hitbox and run across the screen throwing cake and various desserts. She'd also be able to blow bubbles just like she does in her human form. Her assists would be her familiars, just like Homura, so let's cover her finishers. The first would be the iconic, world-shattering bite. You know the one. I think it would be pretty fun to see in game, and if this were a real game, I'd love to see people's reaction when they see this happen. Her second finisher would be a form change, allowing her to transform into a magical girl. In this form, she'd have stronger bubble attacks, and her finisher would blend the opponents, just like her transformation. So that's Madoka. I think these girls probably got the most special treatment out of anyone, so let's move on to another series that's near and dear to my heart. Shugo-chara is one of the most iconic shows I grew up with. Featuring a cast of magical girls and boys, who would I like to see joining our roster? As expected, the main character has to feature. Amu is a pretty versatile character with a whopping 5 main forms. As a result, we'll use her most common transformation, Amulet Heart. Amu would skate across the field and be pretty athletic with high jumps and strong kicks. She can also cheer herself on with her pom-poms to power up her next move. So what about her assists? Which characters would be making an appearance? To be completely honest, I think Amu's assists should only be her other forms. Specifically, Amulet Spade using Colorful Canvas, Amulet Clover using Remake Honey, and Amulet Angel allowing her to hover just a bit. This feels like a good representation of her skills, so let's move on to her finishers. Just like in the anime, the first finisher is Open Heart. It's a great blast with a great OST, so it just had to be here. Her second finisher makes use of that fourth Guardian character, Daya. Amulet Daya rarely appears in the show, so I felt she should be reserved for a special attack. She would summon her globe to perform Starlight Revelation. Finally, her last finisher would summon her main 4 Guardians to become Amulet Fortune. I know Ikto is supposed to be there, but I'd rather forget he exists, so she'll do this attack on her own. I'd like it if she had a really warm feeling blast of light, since the anime didn't give us much to work with. So that's our first character from Shugo-chara, but who else do you think should make the list? Now, initially I was going to put Utao here, but I think there's a much more interesting character to use. Nagihiko is one of the most interesting characters in Shugo-chara. Especially for the time, they represent a really nuanced view of identity. For the purpose of this video, we'll be using he and she for the different forms. She starts off as Yamato Maihime, swaying her robe and scattering cherry blossoms across the field. She'd never use her hands to attack and remain dignified throughout the fight. However, if you were to use a directional input much like Zelda and Sheik, you could transform into Beat Jumper. He'd be much faster in this form and skate around just like Amu. He'd also have more bulk and fight a lot more scrappily. So, do they get assists? Yes. Rima's the first due to their relationship, and she'd throw rotating juggling clubs at the opponent. Her next assist would be Tadase, who makes the opponent bow down with the use of his scepter, giving you time to attack. Finally, Yaya would send a flock of ducks across the screen to slow down the opponent. Kukai doesn't have that many unique skills, so I guess he could shoot a ball or something. Now that we've come up with all the assists, I think we need to come up with 6 finishers, and we're not going to spend too much time here because it would make the video really long. The first finisher would be Beat Dunk, where he uses a blue basketball and dunks it on the foe's head, or Robe of Feathers, which would trap you in ribbons. The second finisher would be Blaze Shoot, where he'd throw a frisbee that hits the opponent and sends them back. I don't think there would be much violence in this game. But as Yamato Maihime, your second finisher would just be a fan instead, but it would be implied that the opponent is sliced, just no actual damage. Finally, I think the last attack should represent the harmony between both forms. They would appear at once and shoot a big blue ball of energy surrounded by cherry blossoms. I think it's the best possible finisher for both of these characters. If you're enjoying this so far, be sure to like and comment, as well as subscribe. I'm always open to covering magical girl content, and let me know who you think should make it in. But that's all we're gonna get from Shugochara. It's time to move on to the next series. When coming up with a magical girl game, I obviously wanted to include one that used real magic. This was a really hard choice to make, as I wanted a character with a lot of spells. Now initially I did consider Sakura, but her move pool was a bit too diverse and I haven't finished the show, so instead we'll go with one of my favorite witches, Akko. Akko is a high energy witch from Little Witch Academia. She's a fun character equipped with a really powerful weapon that would play a huge role in our combat. Akko's most consistent spell is her metamorphosis, so I think we should incorporate this to make up for her lack of magic. She could transform into an elephant to press her foes, a penguin to slide across the field, and turn into a bird to blow down on the opponent. Additionally, she would be able to perform light shows just like Shario, which could stun the opponent, giving her more time to attack. So that gives her a pretty unique move pool with unique plays, and now it's time to talk about who would show up for the assist slots. Akko's friends would serve as her assist characters. Latte would make a potion to give Akko a bit more strength, while Sushi would poison the foe, reducing their health for a period of time. Given Latte's family cooks, I considered a healing spell, but we have enough characters who can do that, so I think that the potion should just buff Akko's next hit. The finishers would obviously use the shiny rod, and we would be using the first word for the first finisher. The rod would be transformed into a bow, firing a magical arrow. Her second finisher would use the third word, transforming the rod into a hook that swings the opponent about. Finally, her last finisher would accomplish one of her very first dreams, to fly on a magic broom just like Shiny Shario. This would let the player fly across the screen, inflicting huge damage whenever she made contact. Think Sonic or Pikachu's Final Smash. I think it would be a pretty fun final move, and can imagine that controlling it would provide a fun learning curve for dedicated players. Next up, we've got one of my favorite characters from Tokyo Mew Mew. While I never finished it, Mint was always my favorite. I love her ballet inspiration and the beauty and poise she represents. So what exactly would she fight like? Mint would be a ballet dancer much like Ahiru and Kraehe. Additionally, she'd be able to fly for a period of time. Because I don't know what the other girls do, I'll just assume they can attack for her assists, but I'm not that well versed in Tokyo Mew Mew. I know they have finishers, so that's what they would do. Mint's finishers would take advantage of both wind and feathers. The first would be Mint Arrow, with her second summoning a cyclone of feathers that sweeps up the opponent. Finally, I'd love it if her last attack would grant her full flight and let her arrows shoot up into the sky, sending them raining onto the field. I hope I can finish this show someday and hopefully come to appreciate the Mew Mews even more. There's a lot of magical girls to consider, so we're only going to pick one more character before wrapping this roster up. There's been a lot of passive characters and gentle fighters, so for the last one, I'm making it a personal pick of one of my favorite brawlers. Yuki Yuna is one of the only Madoka clones that I actually enjoyed. The show has a rather unique style with a very fun premise. Yuna is our main character, and she fights with her fists. She's an upbeat girl who would punch and kick, probably being the most direct attacker. I think she'd be a rushdown character with lots of combos and a very aggressive playstyle. Yuna's assists would be the other members of the Hero Club, with each of them using their unique weapons. Mimori would shoot bullets across the screen, while Karin throws her katanas. Fu would slide in to do a big swing with her sword, and finally, Itsuki would use magical vines to hold the opponent in place. Now because Yuna's a straight up brawler, I'd like to give her a special gimmick with her finishers. With 1 bar of meter, Yuna would either use Hero Punch or Hero Kick. This would take advantage of her 2 fairies and let her keep the physical combat theme. Now of course you could push a button to pick between them, but your opponent wouldn't be aware of this, keeping them guessing. However, if you charge up 3 bars of meter, you could unlock a new form, Mankai. This would give Yuna the gigantic arms from the anime. I love how dramatic these forms are, and I would love to have her use them. Because of its sheer size, I'd like it if she lost a little health over time just to keep this viable. Her Mankai form would be pretty overwhelming, and she'd be a character you unlock much later. I think that not giving her a finisher for 2 bars of meter would kind of incentivize you to keep going and make the Mankai form a little more balanced because it would take a while to get to it. If you were to use a finisher while in this form, it would just be a generic powered up version of Hero Punch, except maybe hitting twice. I think that I've given a lot of characters special treatment, but given that she's one of my favorites, I don't really feel bad about that. With her in the cast, I think we've got a pretty diverse move pool, which represents the genre pretty well. Now, there are a lot of series I've watched that just aren't here, and a lot of Western shows which I would rather save for a different kind of video. With that said, what do you think of our roster for this hypothetical magical girl game? Is there anyone you wish we could have added, or would you tweak the fighting system entirely? What do you think of the magical girl fighting game that we've put together? What changes would you make, and who do you think deserved to be here? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and stick around for more content like this. With that said, I will see you guys next time.